All right, so we wanted to have you guys have a conversation with everybody about doing rapid product research in uncertain times, and we're so excited that you guys were able to join us. So before we start the content, just a brief intro for Allison and I to let you know who's the host if you haven't met us before. So I'm Holly. I'm the founder of H2R Product Science, and I do product management coaching and consulting and training. I was product manager, a group product manager at Shutterstock after their IPO, and worked at Media Math with Allison in the high growth days. And I'm also host of the Product Science podcast. And then Allison is a user researcher. She was a product manager before as well, but just loves user research so much. She's focusing on that. And Allison was product at Media Math as well, and she also was product manager at Newzella, which is another successful startup, one in the ed tech space. And we're both with H2R Product Science. We believe there's a science to high growth product management, and we do training, coaching, and consulting. So we wanted to share with you guys a lot of the stuff that we just do day to day and answer any questions you have. So our users' lives are changing fast. They've changed a lot in the past month or two. And I think sometimes when we talk to people, they think that because their life changed too, they know, what the changes are and what it means for their business. But the truth is that you can't know for sure. Everybody's got a lot of different complexities going on, and people are going to be making changes to businesses and products to try to work with the new environment. And we want to remind you that you shouldn't make them based on assumptions. You should make them based on research, but you have to do fast research. So let's talk about what that looks like. So let's go to the next slide. So those of you who know me will have seen this before, most likely. I always like to remind people this quote from Richard Feynman, who is a Nobel Prize winning physicist who teaches the scientific method, or taught the scientific method. And he says, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. So if you're familiar with confirmation bias or other parts of behavioral psychology, you probably know that it's really easy for us to assume that we already know what we need to know, or that if we're excited about a new idea, it's really easy for us to fall and think that that idea is right and accurate and the best one. But using the scientific method, we use that to help us question our assumptions and come up with evidence instead. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to do that. And rapid product discovery will help us to help our customers. So many of you come from different industries and different backgrounds, but one of the things that we at H2R Product Science like to say is that we are using technology to make people's lives better. Sometimes it might be very directly, like it's a healthcare technology, but sometimes it's indirectly. It's just the work that they do day to day, or the way that they shop, or the way that they entertain themselves. But we can use it to help people. And if we're fortunate enough to still be working in this time, then we can use our energy to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make our product really valuable. And that will help both our business and the people that we work with and for. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison. She's going to share with you how we do the recruiting, the right participants for remote discovery research. And she's really a wealth of information about everything involved in doing the discovery work that we do. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A portion at the end. But if you send us messages during it, that way we may be able to answer in the moment as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison.
Great. Thanks, Holly. Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Allison, and wanted to talk a bit about recruiting. And first, it's important to define the research goals before you start. So once you know what you want to learn, then you can figure out how best to do so. And that includes who you should talk to. So at different stages of discovery, we'll have different levels of specificity as to who we're going to speak to. And initially, you might just know that you need to talk to people who recently took the action you're interested in exploring. You might not know much more than that, but then after you talk to the first group, other important characteristics will start to emerge, and in the next round, you'll want to act on what you learned in the first round. So maybe you notice that a certain group had a particular behavior. In the next round of recruiting, you will want to screen on that and see if you can talk to that group. So depending on your goals, you might want to talk to internal users or external users or people who haven't yet used your product, or maybe you want to speak to all of them. Any way you do it, you'll probably want to screen people to make sure that they fit the profile as much as you know it, to help answer those research questions. And a screener is really the easiest way to do that. And by screener, I just mean a set of questions that will help us identify the right people to talk to. And we're not looking for scientific accuracy. We just want to learn enough to make a decision. So we'll talk about that in a bit. And I like to do rounds of 3 to 5 people, pausing after each round to evaluate where we are with the learnings, if we want to change our recruiting. So that's a good time to pause. And as opposed to market research, which is usually based on the demographics, it's helpful to think about behaviors and situations or past experiences as the important attributes. So it's rare that we would screen on, we're looking for women in the 30 to 40 age group. We'd be more likely to say we're looking for people who take a certain action or have a particular behavior. So maybe we're looking for runners who use technology every day, something like that. But getting too specific too quickly might narrow your focus without looking wide with discovery. That's what we're trying to do. So very tactically, when creating questions for your screener, try not to ask yes or no questions. Like if you want to know if people use a certain product, don't just ask, do you use this product? Put it in a list of products and ask which ones they use. So this helps weed out people who may just be trying to get through the screener if you're looking outside of your own users, or even within your users, for people who maybe just want to get through the screener successfully, especially for paid studies. And in that same vein, I would always include at least one open-ended question, and this will give you more information about potential participants so you can make the best decision. So for example, working with someone who was looking for developers who use a certain technology, one of the open-ended questions we asked was more specific about that technology. And then we were able to read through those screener responses and see who actually knew what they were talking about and who was just kind of trying to muddle their way through that last question. And that really helped us get the people who are actually in segment for us. And we don't get it right all the time. If someone slips through who doesn't fit into your profile, that's a learning moment. And you can use that session to practice your skills and also figure out what you might need to change in the screener in the future to avoid that situation next time. So I've had this happen. Someone misunderstood the screener. They answered in a way that made sense, but once you start speaking to them, you realize they're actually not who you want exactly, but still a good interview moment, and you might learn something anyway. So in particular for remote sessions, you want to set expectations. So when you're posting or sending out a screener, I would include some information about what the study is and what they can expect after they fill out the screener. So maybe that you'll be reviewing the responses, and if they fit the bill, you'll be in touch via email. Just be clear about what next steps are. And if there is incentive, being clear what that is, because that can help get people through the screener. There's no need to be extra specific about what the interview will include, but it's best for potential participants to understand what they're getting involved with. So I would do this for any recruiting, not just remote, but I think especially including information about how the sessions will take place is important here. And for remote sessions, I would suggest to use video as much as possible instead of just voice. And you'll probably want to add a screener question about access to a computer with a webcam because of that. So when you're scheduling sessions with your screen participants, just double check that they have access to the technology that will support your video conferencing software or whatever you're using, because it's never fun to have to surprise each other in the moment when you get into an interview. And then these are just some thoughts about if you have a team who's interviewing. If you use something like Zoom that allows you to easily record your sessions, that's a great option. This is helpful both for just general records, but also can be really useful in a remote situation because it can avoid having your whole team join as observers for the call. So you can record that session and people can watch it later, and you don't have to have 10 of your teammates join and intimidate the participant or make them feel more performative. So in general, we try to limit just to a facilitator and one note taker who would be introduced, and then the rest of the team can watch the recording later. And there are also tools that allow more observers without the participants seeing it. So if that's important to your team, those could be a good option for you. And if you recruit someone who doesn't have the right AV set up when they join, which has happened to me, I turned into an IT troubleshooter with everyone. It's okay to just reiterate the tech requirements that you said before, and you can end the session. Some technical issues you can work through. If they're having trouble sharing their screen or something, that's usually something you can talk someone through. But if their internet connection is totally unstable, there are some things that'll make the session impossible. So it's okay to end the session and just let them know why. So those are just some basics about recruiting, and in particular for remote recruiting. I'll turn it back over to Holly for the next session.
Thanks, Allison. So Allison, why don't we actually switch and I'll share my screen now since I've got the rest of the slides.
Sounds good.
Great. So I think one other thing that maybe would be useful while I'm sharing my screen would be, what are your favorite tools that we actually use for doing the recruiting and for any tools that you use for running the sessions?
Sure. So my go-tos would be Zoom, and we record all our sessions. And they also have a transcription option, which is pretty useful to look through later. Recruiting, we use user interviews a lot. That's a great site, both for professional and just consumer recruiting. In addition to, we've also just put screeners up on Reddit or other forums where particular segments we think might be. So, but I'll give a plug for user interviews because I think they've been really great recently.
Yeah.
Testing time, if you're looking for international, has been useful.
Do you have a sense of what the response rate or the acceptance rate tends to be? Like, how many people do there have to be in a pool for you to fill a slot of 3 to 5 interviews?
How many people in a pool?
Or like, how many people get screened? What does that look like?
So that depends on user interviews. Which is what I've been using most recently. The participants who fill out the screener seem to be pretty willing to jump in. I think we usually get, I'm trying to think, if I'm trying to fill like 4 slots, they might get something like 80 responses, but not all of them would be qualified. So the response rate, it kind of depends on how niche the audience is. But in ways of timing, we can get people within a day or 2 if you use a tool like that. When it's on our own, it can be a little longer. I'd give myself like a week if I was recruiting on my own. And
when you say recruiting on your own, that's for when you're looking for either existing customers of a client or contacts that we know personally or that through referrals.
Right, or posting on forums that I know just response rate is lower there because it's not the main purpose of that site. Like I'm thinking of Reddit in particular because that's where we've used for some specific like developer gaming things.
Cool. All right, well, thank you for sharing that information about recruiting and finding the right participants. So once you've got those participants, I'm going to share with you a bit about how we plan and conduct compassionate interviews, especially during difficult times. So starting with the difficult times portion, the very first thing that you have to keep in mind is you need to meet these people where they are. And this is true for doing a user interview. It's also just true for sort of any kind of professional interaction we're having in this period of time. You really want to start with empathy, start with listening, start with finding out how the person is doing and how they're feeling about having this conversation with you. Remind them what the goal of it is, or why you're there. Introduce yourself, say you're doing research on whatever the topic is, and thank them for giving some of their time and energy to you. You know, they're probably already spending a lot of time on Zoom calls, and they're spending a little more time on when to talk with you. So, you know, be genuine and be authentic to begin with. From that, you want to let the conversation evolve organically. So I sort of like to think of it as something that's growing, and you've got, you know, different stems and branches and leaves that you could be looking at or pulling on at any given time. And you want to be always sort of thinking, okay, you know, if I just ask them a question about a time when they could have a, let's say you were doing research on the last time that they picked a new developer tool, because that's something we've done before. So maybe you're asking about the last time that they did that, and they kind of wander a little bit in their conversation. Every detail that they share with you is something that you could pick up on or you could let sit. And so it's really great to take notes of those things so that you can come back to it later if there's something where you're going to pick up on one thread and leave another. And you want to keep in mind kind of interview be so rigid. So one of the things I think Allison mentioned at the beginning is the research goals, that, you know, in order to decide who you're going to recruit, you need to know what you're trying to learn. But part of planning this is that you need to do that before you actually sit down on the call with them. We always recommend that you actually write out research goals separately from writing out any kind of interview guide or script. And the reason is that the questions you want to answer with your research often are not the exact questions you're going to ask your customer. You don't want to ask them directly what you want to know, because then their human bias often will get in the way. So for example, you don't want to ask them, do you plan to get a new tool for your work in the next 3 months? You want to ask them about other times they've done that and what leads to it and what problems they have. And you want to really focus in on past behavior, because people are poor predictors of their own behavior, but they're great at they're better at telling you about what they've done in the past and why, and they're better at telling you about their problems and the pains that they have. So, so you want to start with that list of what are the goals, what are the questions that you have. And one of the things that we like to use is these 3 questions. We are trying to figure out, how do we know that users will act on this pain, the pain that our problem solves, that our product solves? How do we know that users want this outcome, the outcome that our product drives them to? And how do we know that users can use the solution, so that the solution we're proposing is actually usable to them? So all of those questions are really important, and we like to focus in on who the market is, what their pain is, what their outcome is, and what their solution is, as the 4 pieces that are critical to having a real strategy behind what we're doing. So I think in this time, it's even more important that we're finding out what challenges people are really having and what outcomes they really want. One example you might have for this is that some people today that I've spoken to are particularly, you know, maybe they've had an adjustment period to working remotely, and so the outcome for them is to feel comfortable with the tools that they're using to work remotely. Whereas other people, they don't actually feel like they need any help with that. Either they've already been doing it for a long time, or they're confident that this is temporary, and they're not too worried about making that better. Those people are more worried about just the business as usual problems that they always have to solve. And so that's really like 2 different outcomes, right? So that's, you know, maybe the discomfort of the unusual working situation is a similar pain for both of them, both types of people, but the outcome that they're looking for is different. And so that's the type of thing we want you to get at from the research that you do. That'll help you understand if you do need to do a pivot in your product or in the design of your product for the changes that are going on in your customers' lives. You really want to understand, how have their goals changed? How have their desired outcomes changed? Do they still want the same thing they wanted before? Are they more concerned with something different now? And then finally, you want to really test the usability of the solution. I think in product and in product discovery, this particular question is actually probably the most well understood. People are always, you know, usability testing has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of different ways to test whether people can use it. But some of those ways are stronger than others. Some of those ways are better at evidence than others. One of the things that we often see is sometimes, especially in bigger companies that have the like contract with certain tools, is they might ask such basic questions that the answers to them aren't terribly helpful. So for example, if you've ever seen a piece of research where somebody did a usability test and it said, look for the big red button, click the big red button, and then, it watches to see whether the person was able to find and click the button. That's too much detail, right? Because you're not actually learning whether they can use it. What you need to know is, can they get to the outcome that they want to get to with your solution? So that's always what we look for when we're doing some kind of designer usability test is, if this product is meant to solve problem X and get to outcome Y, when we put this design, whether it's a wireframe or a full-fledged product, in front of the customer, can they solve problem X and can they get to outcome Y? That's really all we need to see in that usability testing. And how quickly can they do it and what struggles do they have? So those are the things you want your research goals to be around. And another thing that we want to remind everybody is that the type of research we're talking about right now is qualitative research. If we're doing product discovery interviews, that's qualitative, not quantitative. So you're looking to understand the why and the how. You're really looking to explore the space and ask questions and observe and understand behavior. You can use quantitative research in combination with qualitative research. You use it to understand how much and how many, but you really need the qualitative research to come first to understand what kind of changes you'd even want to be quantifying. So we recommend that for making rapid decisions, you want to start with the qualitative discovery interviews. So let's say you're doing qualitative discovery interviews, you're doing them remotely, you're designing your research goals, and you're designing a script or an interview guide to help you answer those research goals. How do you know when you've got enough data to make a decision? So the rule of thumb that I like to go with is, if you're doing it in chunks of about 5, are you getting a very similar response from at least 3 of the people? So if we do discovery interviews on 5 people about what kind of problems they've had adopting new developer tools, are we hearing similar answers from at least 3 of the 5 people? Are they telling us some of the same things? Or is each of those 5 people telling us something very different about the way this has worked in their organization? If they're all telling us something very different, then we know we need to keep talking to more people, because we're picking such a wide problem space that more than 5 people is needed to understand the problems and pains and desired outcomes in that space. But if we have got a pretty consistent answer in just 3 people or 3 to 5 people, then we can start to say, okay, there's some consistency to this. This must be something we can start trying to quantify. Now, if let's say we did 5 and they were very different from each other, and then we did another 3 and they were still different from each other, one of the things that we would start looking for is patterns in how we had recruited and what we had used to screen and what we're using to define our segment. So that we could say, maybe these are also different because we have such a loose definition of what segment of people we're working for or targeting. Maybe there's something in that we can actually use to get more specific on who we want to target. And going back to what Allison was saying, we would typically get more specific on behaviors, not demographics. So for example, maybe we're going to get more specific on whether we only want to talk to people who have adopted a new developer tool in the last year, rather than just talking to anybody who might theoretically ever adopt one. That's the type of thing. Maybe we get it shorter to 6 months, or maybe we say only people who have the authority to make the decision themselves. There might be different criteria we could add to constrain that segment. And the fact that doing the research of those interviews had led us to identify that we needed to constrain the criteria more would be learning in itself and helpful and valuable. So that's part of the flow, and we just keep going until we feel like there's some consistency and we understand this segment. So another key thing that this leads us to is this concept that you're going to do research continuously. So sometimes you have enough to make a decision after 3 to 5 interviews. Sometimes, maybe it'll take 10. Maybe you were starting on something so big that it's going to take you 15 or more. But the truth is that you're going to be making product decisions every week and every sprint. And you need to keep doing this research every week and every sprint in order to have the most valuable information at your fingertips as you make those decisions. So if you have a recruitment system set up so that you're regularly recruiting people who are part of the target segment for this piece of your roadmap, this piece of your strategy, then you can have that recruitment separate from the planning of the research itself. And you can do this research every sprint or every week. Maybe that's even the same, but if your sprints are 2 weeks or longer, then you can do this research at least every sprint. And each time you get to within a couple days of going to talk to the participants, that's when you say, what is the highest value question for us to answer with our research right now? And the way that you want to ask yourself that is to think about, which decisions do you have to make in your day-to-day work as a product leader in this week or in this sprint? What information could you find to help you with that? So this is going to be a continuous process where you're doing this research every sprint, and you're using that to feed into the decisions that you're making. So sometimes this is for these really big picture questions, just like Allison had said. Sometimes you're doing a big wide net for your recruit. Sometimes this is for smaller questions, like we're doing, design details in a product decision. But you want to be doing it continuously, and that's going to help you build up a really solid understanding of what's going on in your users' lives throughout the period of doing this development and beyond. So we also wanted to remind you that it's not enough to be right. You also have to be persuasive. So one of the challenges with doing rapid product research is that you're getting insights all the time, and you start to feel pretty confident that you have an idea of what your product needs. But not everybody on your team and in your company is spending that amount of time understanding your customer and their day-to-day pains. And that can lead to challenges because they need to be behind the decisions that you're guiding. But we recommend that you don't try to think of it as you make these decisions and you tell them what to do. You need to see it as you're going to support them. You're going to provide the information. So one of the tools that we use for this is something we do an interview snapshot, where we share from each of the discovery interviews that we do. Allison will put together a one-screen snapshot, and it'll show a picture of the person and some interesting quotes about things that they said that were valuable to us. And then it'll also put it in context and tell us which segment they were in, which behaviors they had that had made them qualify to be a part of the research, things like that, so that we know how to take that into consideration while we're making decisions. So we'll share things like that with the entire team as they come out. So if we're doing 3 to 5 interviews in a sprint, then every sprint, you'll see 3 to 5 new product interview snapshots. And that's one of the ways that we persuade. It's one of the ways that we get others to be on the same page as us with the information and the decisions that we're trying to lead. So as you view research as a continuous process, there's a couple things to remember. So we're hoping that you're looking to do more discovery than you've been doing, or get people in your team to do more discovery than you've been doing. The first thing is to remember the value. You want to build a product that people will love. Research is a lot cheaper than building a product. And the most successful tech teams are the ones who pivot quickly. So especially if you've got some challenges on the horizon for your product right now, being ready to identify what's the big need right now is going to help your team be successful. We also always advocate for starting small and showing the value. Maybe you're going to do a 1-question intercept quiz. So when I was at Shutterstock, we did this on before we were doing Shutterstock Editor, we did an intercept quiz when people were downloading an image and asked them what they were going to use that image for. So it gave us a sense of the use cases that were in play at that point in time. Maybe you'll do an informal user interview. So if you're at a place where scheduling formal ones or recruiting is hard, you can start with something informal if you know somebody who fits the target. And maybe you can start with gathering data from existing sources. These are all pieces of the research as a whole. So this interviews is a core staple of the way that we do rapid product research, but we do also look at data. We do also put quizzes out. We do also do informal things. The idea is that you want to triangulate all of this information together from all of the sources with an understanding of what biases each piece of information might come with, and what information you want to share with your team and with your stakeholders to get them on board with the direction that you see things moving in. That's a bit of how we do this continuous research and use it to make decisions and help us. I'll share a little story about for our own business. We've recently been doing some research like this to see how our customers are changing, the changing economy around us. We put up our own recruitment screener and look to see, talk to people with different criteria to say, you know, who might still be looking for the kind of work that we do. And so Allison can speak more to sort of how we recruited and what we've done. But, you know, this is something that we see as so valuable to making a business succeed that, you know, we do it ourselves, especially, and even in tough times when, you know, if the future might be uncertain, but the best way to make the good decisions to keep you alive is to actually invest your time in getting that data and getting that evidence. Once we have a sense of something interesting from the interviews, we might do things that are more quantitative to give us a sense of how much and how many answers are. And so the way that might look, and so I'll answer that first about the quizzes, and then I'll answer Stephanie's question about the snapshots. So often what we'll do with quizzes is, or with surveys, is we'll actually use the interviews that we've done and the stories that we've heard to write the multiple choice answers in a multiple choice quiz. So if it's something like, you know, what are you planning to use this image for? The options come from what we've heard people tell us in research. If we're trying to figure out whether people are gearing up for a change in the way that they work, we might take a couple of the answers. We might look at the answers that people gave us during the interview section and say, okay, there's a range of ways that people are changing the way that they work. Some people are already working fully remote anyways, and it's no change. You know, some people are just a little bit of change because they like missed the chance to go into the office, but they were already doing a lot of stuff remotely. Some people are huge amounts of change. Some of them are ready for that to be longer term. Some of them think that's shorter term. We might take those and say, how do we bundle this into a couple different distinct options and write it in the words of the customers, write it in the words that we heard from them. That's going to make a much stronger quantitative piece of research, because if any of you have ever had this experience of filling out a research questionnaire and saying, well, none of these answers apply to me, or I want to pick 2 of them. This is the way that we get past that so that won't happen, or at least won't happen as much. And then we send those out in a number of different ways. Sometimes we'll send them out with a paid service, like Allison can speak more to this because she's done a bunch of recent research on this, but depending on the kind of audience we're trying to reach, sometimes we'll send them out with a paid service where it's a pay per answer. Sometimes we'll try to recruit our own people to fill out the survey, like through Reddit or through friends and contacts or things like that. Does that answer, Emily, your question about the quizzes? Let us know if you have any other follow-up questions on that. Awesome. And Allison, do you want to pull up a snapshot, or should I find one for the one screen interview takeaway?
Yeah, let me find that.
Okay. While you find that, I'm going to go to the last thing before the Q&A, which is that we did want to share with you guys that we have an option if you're looking for more support. The Product Science Salon is our new membership community for people on the path from agile product development to high growth product leader. It comes with an online course, the Product Science Success Path. The idea behind that is that, you know, we talk to a lot of people who are trying to adopt this rapid product research to be able to not just quickly understand what the strategic decision would be, but also consistently get the buy-in from the people around them to make that strategic decision. People who are trying to get to that place but don't quite feel like they're there yet, you know, maybe they're hitting challenges with getting buy-in, or maybe they're hitting challenges with getting enough research logistics handled, or maybe they feel like the research just isn't telling them, maybe they feel like the users aren't matching what they're learning in the research. This online course gives you a sense of what next step to take when. So if you've been reading best practices on how to do product discovery, the idea here is that it's not gonna, I mean, there may be some pieces of something that you didn't know, but for the most part, it's about how do you put it together, in what order, depending on where you are today. How do you identify where you are today, and how do you figure out what the next best step is for you as a product manager or a product leader? And then there's going to be weekly new content. Sometimes it's a live Q&A. Sometimes it'll be a video, like an online learning lesson. There'll be articles, downloadables, things like that. It's just one piece a week because we don't want it to be overwhelming and we want everyone to be on the same page. But the pieces will be geared to be useful to more senior and expert practitioners, but with some ability for us to sort of help you understand the basics if you're, I mean, the intermediate sort of level. And then there's also a curated Slack community supported by our team, and the whole salon itself is curated. So in order to be a member of the salon, you have to apply and talk with me. If you already know me, great. But if you don't, then when you sign up at the website, which is H2RProductScience.com/membership, we'll let you know how to book a time to talk with me, and I'll just make sure that you're a good fit, that we can help you, and that you will get value and provide value to the community. And so that way we make it pretty different from some of these Slacks that have like 20,000 people who wish they were product managers. So we're hoping that some of you would like to join us for that. The beta price is $149 a month, and the first 5 people to sign up after this session will get a free 1-hour coaching session from me. So I'll send an email out as well after this, which has the link to how to sign up, but it's at h2rproductscience.com/membership. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison to share the interview snapshot.
Yeah. So this is an example of what our snapshots look like. So it's some sort of, I think here we have the template. So a user snapshot with memorable name, location, quotes, 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 dimensions, demographics if useful. So what that looks like in practice is something like this. And it all depends on what we're focused on at the time. But you can see here, we put in the quotes that are relevant to what we're looking at. And then another thing that I like to include that I've added down here, this is from the debrief of an interview. These are some of the questions that we go over after we've had an interview with anyone who's attended. I like to include these in the snapshot also. The quotes can be kind of high level. These get much more specific. So
Allison, what is an interview debrief?
An interview debrief, that is after you hang up with the participant or the participant leaves your office, the facilitator and any observers, note takers spend not a long amount of time, 5 to 15 minutes going through these. And this is how we often structure it, and just get down as much as we can from the interview so that you don't end up the next week not remembering what the important pieces were. So this is a quick way to get down the learnings from that interview right away, and a great way to be able to share out some of the key facts.
And another thing I'll add is that if you have members of your team or your stakeholders or your client, if you're a consultant that aren't as experienced at understanding customer behavior, doing the debrief after is also a great place to just sort of check in on whether you thought you heard and saw the same things. Mm-hmm. Often the way this will play out is a client will think that the interview was very promising and will think that it wasn't, is one of the common versions of that, where we use the debrief to explain what we saw happening there. Other times it'll be that they think it confirms the approach they were taking, and we think it's exciting, but it suggests a different direction. So it's good to have those debriefs after. And then when you do that regularly over time, everybody gets sort of leveled up to understanding what it means. Thank you for sharing that, Allison. Great. Well, we'll hang out for a couple minutes in case anybody wants to talk in a smaller setting, but we're about out of time. And yeah, hopefully you all got some value out of this. We're super grateful to have you here to talk with. So thanks for joining us.